Two airline passengers recently shared experiences that sparked a much bigger conversation about air travel, personal space, and fairness. According to publicly shared accounts, both travelers were told at the airport that they might need to purchase an additional seat because of an airline policy known as the customer of size policy. But here's where things became complicated. One of them had already flown part of her trip without any issue. Another says she was asked to buy an extra seat with very little explanation about why. So the real question people began asking online wasn't just about the policy itself, it was about how that policy is actually enforced and whether travelers clearly understand it before they arrive at the airport. Because what happened next raised a surprisingly simple question that millions of travelers could relate to. When rules depend on judgment instead of clear standards, who decides where the line is? One of the travelers, Erica DeBoer, says the situation began during a routine check-in for a flight from Omaha to Las Vegas. According to her public account, a staff member informed her that she would need to purchase an additional seat. The reason given, she says, was for the safety and comfort of other passengers. But what stayed with her the most wasn't just the request, it was the lack of a clear explanation. She later shared that the phrase safety and comfort was repeated several times, but she says she wasn't given specific guidelines about how the decision had been made. For someone who describes herself as a frequent flyer with the airline, the moment felt confusing, not because she objected to the policy itself, but because she says she didn't know exactly how the determination was made, and that uncertainty led to a difficult choice. According to her account, she ultimately purchased the extra seat so she could continue with her trip. But the story didn't end there, because only days later another traveler described a surprisingly similar moment, but with a very different outcome. Grace Simpson shared her experience on social media shortly afterward. She explained that she had already completed the first leg of her journey without any issue. Her flight from Norfolk to Baltimore went normally, but during her connecting flight to San Diego, she says she was pulled aside at the gate by a supervisor. According to Simpson, the supervisor explained that a gate agent had identified her as a potential customer of size. That meant she might need to purchase another seat. What made the moment difficult, she says, was the timing. From her perspective, she had already gone through ticketing, security, and boarding on the earlier flight with no concerns raised. So hearing the request mid-journey felt unexpected. Simpson later explained that the supervisor himself appeared uncomfortable during the conversation, which she believes shows how complicated these situations can be for both travelers and employees. But something interesting happened next. Instead of requiring the additional purchase, the supervisor ultimately moved her to an empty seat in the back row of the plane, allowing her to continue the flight without extra cost. And that small change raised an even bigger question. If two travelers experienced the same policy, why did their situations end so differently? Southwest Airlines, like several other airlines in the industry, has a policy designed to address situations where a passenger may need additional seating space. According to information publicly available on the airline's website, travelers who believe they may not comfortably fit within a single seat are encouraged to book an additional seat in advance. The policy is intended to help balance comfort and safety for everyone on board. But one phrase in the guidelines has drawn attention. The airline states that staff may determine when an additional seat is needed at their discretion. And that word, discretion, is where the conversation online really began. Because discretion can sometimes mean flexibility, but it can also mean different decisions in different situations. And that's exactly what both travelers say made the experience difficult to prepare for. Both DeBoer and Simpson emphasized that their concerns weren't necessarily about the policy itself. Instead, they focused on something more practical: predictability. If travelers know the rules ahead of time, they can plan accordingly. But if the decision happens in real time at the airport, it can create uncertainty, especially in an already stressful environment like air travel. Simpson explained that when something as personal as body size becomes part of the discussion, the experience can feel deeply uncomfortable, not just because of the situation itself, but because it happens in a very public place. And that raises an important point many travelers rarely think about. Airports are spaces where thousands of strangers pass through every hour. Small interactions can suddenly feel very big. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Because both travelers say the policy might actually work better with clearer communication, long before passengers ever reach the airport. Both travelers suggested that the biggest improvement might be something very simple: clearer communication during the booking process. For example, Simpson suggested that airlines could include a visible notice, prompt, or confirmation during ticket purchase, something that helps travelers understand the seating expectations before they finalize their booking. In her view, transparency doesn't just mean having the policy written somewhere online, it means making sure passengers actually see and understand it before their trip begins. Because by the time someone reaches the airport, most of the decisions about travel, time, budget, and seating have already been made, and that's where unexpected changes can feel frustrating. But the conversation didn't stop with communication, because the discussion quickly expanded into something even bigger: how public spaces accommodate different kinds of people. Air travel has always involved trade-offs. Seats are designed to fit as many passengers as possible while still meeting safety requirements. Airlines try to balance efficiency, affordability, and comfort, all inside a very limited space. But that balancing act sometimes leads to complicated questions. For example, what happens when a passenger needs more space than a standard seat provides? Many airlines address this with policies similar to the one being discussed here. Some encourage booking an extra seat in advance, and some may offer refunds later if the flight isn't full. From an operational perspective, the goal is to ensure that every passenger has their own seating space without overlapping into another seat area. But from a traveler's perspective, the experience can feel very different, because policies on paper in real-life situations at the airport don't always feel the same. And that gap between policy and experience is exactly what turned these individual moments into a viral conversation. When both travelers shared their experiences on TikTok, the responses were immediate. Some people agreed that clearer standards could help avoid awkward situations. Others pointed out that airlines must manage limited seating space and ensure that every passenger can travel comfortably. In other words, people saw the issue from multiple sides. And that's often what makes stories like this travel so quickly online. They aren't simple. They involve real people, real policies, and real questions about how systems work. But one detail from Simpson's story added another unexpected layer to the conversation. Simpson later shared that just days before her flight, she had reached a major milestone in her personal health journey. According to her account, she had recently lost around 100 pounds. For her, that moment had been something to celebrate. So encountering the policy in that moment felt emotionally complicated, not because she felt ashamed of her size, but because the situation arrived during what she saw as a positive step in her life. Stories like that remind people that travel policies don't just exist on paper. They interact with the real experiences of the passengers who encounter them. And sometimes those moments carry more meaning than anyone at the airport realizes. Which leads to a deeper question many travelers are now asking: what does fairness actually look like in situations like this? DeBoer explained that she understands the idea behind the policy. If someone's seating area extends into the neighboring seat, she said she recognizes that adjustments may be necessary. But her main concern focused on consistency. If decisions depend entirely on real-time judgment, she believes travelers may have no clear way to know what to expect before arriving. And that uncertainty can make people feel like their travel experience depends on who happens to be working at the gate that day. Simpson echoed a similar concern. She pointed out that if multiple airline employees see a passenger throughout the boarding process, but a single person later raises a concern, it can feel unpredictable. Not necessarily intentional, but unpredictable. And in public spaces, predictability often matters just as much as the rule itself. So how did the airline respond to the conversation? When asked about the situation, Southwest Airlines explained that their policy is publicly available and aligned with standards used throughout the airline industry. They also noted that guidance is provided on their website for customers who believe they may need additional seating space when booking their flights. From the airline's perspective, the goal of the policy is to ensure comfort and safety for everyone on board. But as these stories show, even well-intentioned policies can lead to questions when different travelers encounter them in different ways. But beyond policies, refunds, or social media reactions, this story highlights something deeper about modern travel. because millions of people move through airports every day, and every one of them arrives with a different story, body, and experience. And systems designed for efficiency sometimes struggle to account for that human reality. Airlines operate within strict physical limits. Aircraft seats have fixed dimensions. Flights must balance passenger comfort, safety guidelines, and operational costs. Those constraints make policies about seating space almost unavoidable. But moments like the ones described by DeBoer and Simpson show how the way a rule is communicated can matter just as much as the rule itself. A clear policy can help people prepare. An unclear one can leave them feeling uncertain at the worst possible moment, right before boarding a flight. And uncertainty, especially in a busy airport environment, can quickly turn a routine trip into a stressful experience. That's why many observers say the real lesson from this situation isn't about one airline or one policy. It's about clarity. When expectations are clearly explained ahead of time, travelers can make informed decisions. They can choose seats that work best for them. They can plan their trip with confidence. And airline staff don't have to navigate difficult conversations in crowded boarding areas. In many ways, transparency protects everyone involved. Passengers understand what to expect, employees have clear guidelines to follow, and the travel experience becomes more predictable for everyone. Air travel is one of the most shared environments in modern life. For a few hours, people from different backgrounds, body types, and personal circumstances all share the same small cabin. That means policies designed for fairness have to balance many perspectives at once: comfort, safety, respect, and accessibility. None of those goals exist in isolation, and stories like this show just how complicated that balance can be. For DeBoer and Simpson, the main message they shared wasn't that airlines shouldn't have seating policies. Instead, they emphasized that clear standards and early communication could make the process feel more fair and predictable. Because when travelers know the expectations ahead of time, they can plan for them, rather than discovering them in the middle of a journey. And in an industry where timing and planning matter so much, that kind of clarity can make a huge difference. Situations like this often start as small personal experiences, but sometimes they reveal larger questions about how systems work. In this case, the conversation moved beyond a single flight and into a broader discussion about transparency, communication, and how public policies affect real people. And as air travel continues to evolve, those conversations are likely to continue as well, because the future of travel isn't just about faster planes or new routes. It's also about how policies adapt to the diverse passengers who rely on them every day. And once you hear what happened there, it might completely change the way you think about flying.